community, you are dealing with very difficult parenting situations. And one of the things that I know I was really scared of when I first split from my ex was, how are my kids going to be okay? And especially, how are they going to be okay if we are completely different as parents? Like, how can a child be okay if one parent cares a bit more, pays a bit more attention, and the other parent is either absent or a counter parent? So today's guest, and I will let her introduce herself in a second, said something really radical, and that's that both parents don't actually need to be on the same page for your kids to be okay. So, Darlynn, why don't you introduce yourself and address how they can possibly be true?
Yeah. Hi. Welcome. Thank you, Lisa, for having me on the Been There, Got Out community. So my name is Darlynn Childress, and I'm a life and parenting coach. And I love that you phrase like be okay. Like you're like, how do we make sure that our kids are going to be okay? And I think we have to sometimes define that. And I'd love to do that on this episode here because it's like when you have two different parents and two different parenting styles, we worry that one parent's influence will be stronger or hurt our children or something like that. And so then our thought is, oh, we have to be on the same page in order to make sure that our kids get the same outcomes. And
And
being on
that's
the same page,
impossible.
it's
Correct.
impossible. Also, even in a relationship where you still live together and get along, you aren't on the same page. There's going to be different approaches and different ways to handle situations. So I don't what I've noticed in my practice, I've been doing this for 15 years teaching parents how to parent, is that really you only need one person who is the emotional coach of the child. And so when we think about like I'd love to hear from you. Like, what do you even think being okay is, and how would you define it? Because I'm just interested in like, not to turn the interview around, but I'm like, what do
That's
you
okay.
think?
No,
Yeah, and then
I mean, so when I split from my ex, my daughter was a tween and my son was a young teen. And I thought, they're going to be ruined. Like, all of the
Mhm.
relationships they have moving forward are going to be ruined. I mean, first of all, backing up a little bit, I thought that, and my ex kept me in the relationship with this. He said, if you break up this family, you're going to destroy our kids. You're going to be the
Mhm.
one responsible for ruining their lives because we are an intact family and it's your fault for disrupting that,
Yes.
for their whole lives we've been together. So that made me feel horrible. But then also when we did split, it was a pretty extreme situation, and he kind of dipped out of their lives, and I just thought, okay, so for my daughter, this is her first role model of a male to relationship, and that's going to ruin her. And then for my son, what if he repeats the same behavior, and what do I do to deal with, like, their father just leaving and not
Mhm.
seeming to be interested in what was going on with them, and just again disappearing for a while. And
Mhm.
then after that, of course, it's a whole other thing. But I just kept thinking, how are these kids going to move forward and have healthy relationships when there's been these significant betrayal and trust issues?
Yeah,
So I don't
right.
know if that was more
It's
complicated than you're used
perfect. It's
to.
perfect because it's exactly what we all want, right? We want our kids to grow up and be able to have good relationships with themselves and with others. And that
Right.
is when we're defining being okay, we're not necessarily defining, being successful or having, a nice house or a good career. We're really talking about how they relate and feeling okay inside and
Exactly.
okay with others. And what's interesting about the success piece is that if you are able to overcome obstacles in your life and like handle failure and handle disappointment, you do keep pushing forward and you do create success in your life. Like, stability and things like that. But what we're to frame our conversation, we're really talking about what I think about it as emotional health.
Hmm.
And when you I want to define it and break it all down, but when you are emotionally healthy, that means that you have a good relationship within yourself, and then you can take that good relationship and apply it into your relationships with others.
Right.
And so, yeah, thinking about all of your fears and concerns and all of those anxieties, it's like, what does it take to have an emotional healthy person? How do you raise an emotionally healthy adult?
I was
Um,
thinking resilience, like, these kids
mhm.
have just been dealt some significant blows. I wasn't thinking at all about success or doing well in school. It's just how are they not gonna fall apart, and
Yeah,
how are
survive.
they gonna have healthy relationships? Because that was the most important thing to me.
Yeah, especially because you're watching a very important relationship in your life unravel, fall apart, and then their relationship with their parent, which is also a very significant relationship with them, for them, also unraveling or changing whatever that dynamic is.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
it's adversarial, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes they become Disneyland parents, or whatever, very permissive or over strict. It can look different ways, or gone, absent parents. And um, so when I think about emotional health, I define it in the framework of emotional literacy. Really thinking about, we teach our kids how to name, how to read, right? And that requires them being able to understand what the letters of the alphabet are. That's where it starts, right? So they see an A and then they get a label for it. A is A, and then they get a sound for it. A is ah. And then you start to put those labels together, and they learn the ABCs, and then they learn how to spell cat, and then they learn how to put sentences together, and then they become literate. And
Mhm.
the same with numeracy, like understanding numbers. And we teach them language around it. We talk about what these letters and numbers mean, and we give meaning to them, and we help them manipulate those numbers and letters and do something with them. And that's the same for emotions. Emotional literacy is really giving your children labels for things that they are experiencing and naming the complex emotions that are coming from these circumstances, and giving them those words, and then they learn how to deal with them and how to put those feelings together and how to actually move through those feelings in the same way they learn in other ways.
That makes sense now, also thinking about how one parent, they don't need to be on the same page, because if you have one parent that can teach them that emotional literacy, then that is enough. So that makes sense, because 'cause I'm thinking kids don't need 2 teachers to teach them, they just need 1. So I
Right.
love that.
Yeah, like, if you think about, someone learning to read when they're really little, and they could have the same instructor for their whole life, and they would learn to read, and then they would learn how to write and use words to communicate, and all of the beautiful things that happen with words. And, you don't need multiple teachers, it's just one skill. It's just, you can have more, it's fine, that's how we structure school with multiple teachers, but it's not necessary in
Yeah.
order to learn.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Darlin, how do you work? Do you usually work with 2 parents, or do you usually work with 1 parent? And how do you help that parent teach their children emotional literacy?
Yeah. Well, it depends, right? If both parents are like, "Hey, I really wanna be this kind of parent who shows up, emotionally regulated
Yeah,
myself."
that's not this community. No, it's
No,
one.
I know exactly. So, that's like, if that happens, I'm like, "Yay, that's a miracle," and, like,
Not good enough.
great. Um, but typically, in my experience, mostly it's women, moms who come and they're like, "I really am worried about my kids," but I have dads too. And so I work in different ways, either group or one-on-one, it doesn't matter. And we talk a lot about feelings, about naming them. And what I've noticed in my practice for the last decade is that most adults aren't emotionally literate.
I know. I think back, like, when did we ever learn in school anything about healthy relationships, or even health emotions in general?
Yeah, no, it's so true. Like, you don't. It's not nowadays, there's some more focus on it. It's, Social emotional development is part of some curriculum, and SED they call it. But it really is. You learn how to talk about your feelings and express them when someone is alongside of you, naming them. You have to have someone who says, "This seems like this feeling to me. I
Mhm.
would call this anger. The what I'm seeing on the outside, my guess is that this is sadness. This is what sadness typically looks like, and I'm wondering if it feels like sadness to you."
Mhm.
And so you think about the letters of the alphabet, or like another thing, like color blindness is interesting because people who are colorblind, they're they get pointed like this is orange, but it doesn't look like orange to them, but they just start calling it orange. So you can't really tell that they're colorblind because it's like mislabeled for them.
Uh-huh.
Um, so we can end up, accidentally mislabeling a feeling because they don't know. They're like, "Oh, that's anger. You're angry. You're angry. You're angry," and they might actually be sad, and it looks like anger. So we want to be careful to kind of explore different expressions of different feelings, and so we become emotionally literate ourselves as parents.
I think
Yeah,
about, because I used to teach high school English, and I know you were a teacher too.
I
But I think
was.
about
Wow.
kids that I'd have in 10th grade who barely knew how to read, and I'm thinking that there's probably many adults out there who also don't have emotional literacy. How do you even begin before you can have a parent help their child learn emotional literacy? How do you begin to work with someone who isn't even in tune with their feelings, which by the way is probably very common in this community, and it doesn't have anything to do with how educated we are. And many of our clients tend to be extremely well educated and highly successful professionals. And I think back to my own experience of, and I feel really silly saying this, but I didn't ever really pause and think, "How do I feel about this situation?" until after I got out, and I think
Mhm.
that was a big part of my relationships in general, is I let myself sort of be led by another person's feelings without pausing and reflecting. So,
Yeah.
how do people even start without somebody telling them? Or if they're feelings blind, like, how does somebody else even know what they're experiencing? Like, where
Yeah,
do you
that's
begin with that?
I love this. It's the power of compassion, ultimately. It's what you do and what you and Chris do when someone comes into your world and you're able to reflect back and narrate for them what what could be going on
Mhm.
underneath, and you asking some questions and you're offering maybe a label, and then they're becoming aware and in tune to their own self. I love, and I'll get into the tool that I teach, but if you ask someone, I wonder if you're feeling sad. And then they have to ask themselves, is this sad?
Mhm.
Hmm. I don't know. They might argue. It's not
Yeah.
really sad. I'm mad, but I'm also disappointed. Oh my God. Then we're in it, right? Then it's like we can really have a conversation around the emotions.
What
And
about
Mhm,
denial, darling? I mean, a lot of
mhm.
people in situations like our community, it starts off as like, "No, I'm okay." Like, things are okay because they're trying so hard to keep things together, or they'll
Yeah.
minimize what's going on.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
And that's a great coping strategy because if we actually take a look at our unhappiness, it can feel like if I start crying, I'll never stop.
Mm. Yeah.
If I start screaming, I'll never quit. And we're a little bit afraid of our own emotion. And that's why it's helpful to be emotionally coached yourself, to have someone say, this is a temporary feeling. They come and go.
Yeah.
We don't stay in any sort of state at permanently. Like the feelings are still there, but the feeling needing to be expressed, it kind of comes and goes. And learning how to modulate that and regulate that is really what emotional regulation is. It's not
As you're
that I'm
saying that, I'm thinking
Mhm.
about the parallels because, we focus so much on something called legal abuse, which involves being stuck in the system and dealing with a really difficult person. And the most common feelings that I have had and that many of our clients have are a sense of rage,
Mhm.
injustice, and especially despair because it feels like it's not going to end.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's helpful also to be, for me, especially on the other side, after years of this, to say, I know those feelings. And I can, like you said, I can almost translate what's going on, and then they sort of calm down, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Like every morning I wake up and
Mhm.
I'm just furious. And I just said the other day in our support group, it got to the point where I was so angry, but not even at my ex, but at the system.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it
so what
transfers.
you're describing, yeah, what you're describing is really helpful. I think it's very validating for people to have words for their feelings
It's
and
so empowering.
situations
It's
that
what we
match.
say. Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
that's what we wanna be seen, right?
Right.
We wanna be felt, we wanna be seen, and when we have the feeling, it's there, but when someone is like, "Yeah, this is rage," and then they identify, they go, "Yeah, that's what it is." Like, when someone nails your feeling, it's so validating, and it's like you even exhaled, you went like, oh, this is what I feel every morning. There's an
Yeah.
exhale, there's like a letdown of it when you experience somebody's compassion
That's so
with. Mhm.
interesting that you said that because, I was just talking about this today, and we had one client in particular when we first met with her, you could see on Zoom she was holding her breath. And
Mhm.
I had to keep saying, "Just I see you're holding your breath, like, try to remember to breathe," and now she's done so well, and she's breathing just fine. But I think it's not even about just naming the feeling, but also allowing the person to experience it and normalizing it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of people in particular are like, "Oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I should feel this way instead."
Yes.
And they don't
And
wanna feel those uncomfortable feelings, and so with us, and I imagine with you too, it's like, "No, like, this is fine.
yeah,
This is what it is, it's appropriate."
the only way to the next feeling is through this one.
Right, right, not
We
to
have
avoid it.
Yeah, you have to go, like, through it, like that little book, we can't go over it. We're going on a bear hunt, like, we can't
Yeah,
go
yeah,
under it, we have to go through it.
yeah,
And I think that's a lot about feelings is that way. It's like, I can, try to pretend that everything's fine, and that feeling is still gonna come out in ways that are unintentional. So when we have, different, we have rage that doesn't go away or sadness that won't go away. These kinds of, sometimes it's pain, it shows up in our body. There's different ways that these unexpressed emotions show up. And as a coach, I'm always looking at like, where are the strategies that you currently use to cope with your big feelings and viewing behavior. So, behavior, whether it's your child or yourself, is always a clue. It's a window into what's going on inside. And we tend to look at behavior as something that is wrong and bad, especially in parenting. And we judge it and we try to manipulate it and change it. And sure, we need limits and boundaries. I'm not a permissive coach, but the first part is looking at what's the wisdom in the strategy, what's the wisdom in the behavior, what is under it. How is this somebody expressing an emotion and this is how their best way to express it? Or is this somebody coping with that emotion and they're trying to get rid of it or change it or, to shift through it? And so that's curiosity is so important in ourselves. Like when I'm looking at trying to understand what's going on inside of me, being
mhm.
curious instead of judging. Or when I'm looking at my children, I'm looking at their behavior and I'm getting curious first.
Yeah.
What is the feeling driving this behavior? Yeah.
Now, one thing that we see a lot, and I also felt this way, was I'm going through so much, I have to keep it together for the kids. I have to put on a good face for
Yeah.
the kids. How do you think that someone who is not getting help, but just feels like they're kind of white knuckling it through this, by themselves, thinking that it's okay as long as the kids see me smiling and acting like everything's fine. Do you think that the kids realize, or how do you think kids are impacted by this?
Yeah, I mean, kids definitely. So we always say like amygdalas talk to amygdalas. And so amygdala is the part of your brain that scans for hazards and decides whether you need to be activated into fight flight and whether you need to seek safety, or and that can, I think in your community what's interesting is, so it's fight flight freeze, faint, fawn. And
Mhm.
fawn is people pleasing. And so sometimes we're unsafe. So we go to safety by people pleasing, by accommodating, by ignoring our needs. And um, so when we're in a fake calm, that's what
Mhm.
we call that. And we're in a faint, or we're in a freeze, or we're in a fawn, or we're in flight. Our kids are aware that we're not actually in a state of true regulation, and their amygdala is firing alongside of ours.
Wow.
So they don't understand that they're like, she says we're safe, but we're not. So I better put on my vigilance and, you know, do something to cope with this unsafe place. So then you get, kids who parentify.
Mhm.
They can
Can you
show up
explain
out.
what that is? I mean, I know, but I'd love for you to just say it for people who might not understand what parentify is.
Yeah, so when this is what I think why people fake it, because they don't want their kids to feel the need. So parentifying is feeling the need for the child to take the role of the parent and protect or soothe or support the adult. And when a child is put in a position of managing an adult's emotion, or helping an adult manage an emotion, that is putting them in an adult position, and we call that parentifying.
Mhm.
Or sometimes it happens where the child will have to parent the other siblings because the parent is unavailable,
Mhm.
and put in a role of disciplining or managing or teaching skills, things like that. It's not
Right, and when you
bad
say yeah, when you
necessarily for your siblings, to help your siblings, but when there's an over reliance on that.
right, and when you say unavailable, we're not talking just physically unavailable, but emotionally unavailable, and
Mhm,
often people in situations like our community, they are so consumed by what's
mhm.
happening with the divorce or the custody issue that they cannot be emotionally available
Which is
because they're in
100% fine. It's
yeah,
100% fine because it's not a permanent state of being
right,
if you're actually doing the work to get back to your own well-being.
mhm. Now, one of the things I think I mentioned to you when we first met was that, um, just like I was the same way, but when we're going through this hell, we're thinking, "We have to save our kids. My kid needs a therapist. I gotta find a good therapist for my kid. That's gonna solve everything." What are your thoughts on that?
I think a good therapist can be really helpful because a good therapist can emotionally coach your kid if you're not available because of your own emotional well-being. And so, like we said, you only need one. You only need one teacher. So
Mhm,
if it's not you and if it's not your co-parent, it could be someone else. It could be a grandparent. It could be an amazing nanny. It could be somebody else. It could be a therapist, whoever. And all we want is for our children. So emotional literacy is defined the way I define it is I know what I'm feeling, I know how to talk about it, and I know what to do with it.
wow.
And so when
Sounds
you
so
have a
simple.
child, what's that?
Sounds so simple.
So simple. It is actually very simple, except for the I know what to do with it piece.
Yeah.
um, but there, like I said, there's wisdom in our strategy. We already know what to do with feelings because we do it all the time.
Mhm,
We cope all the time. We communicate all the time. They're just these strategies that maybe aren't socially great, or they cause problems for others, or they hurt us, right? So it can be a therapist, but ideally your child, they would like you to be their emotional coach.
mhm,
That's what they want. And so as soon as you are available for that, then be available for it and show up, and we can talk about what that looks like. But
yeah,
the first part is emotionally regulating ourselves, which is really about knowing what to do with our feelings. And so we have to understand first naming it. So I start with narrating of the circumstance. Like, I'm married to this guy, he's a jerk, and like he's doing this, and we can like kind of vent a little bit about the circumstance and
Mhm.
allowing a little bit of it. He said he was going to do it and he didn't, or she told me this, and then, right? We can like allow some room to narrate the circumstance and what's happening. And then we have to go to naming. We have to go back into ourselves and being like, and I feel blank about that. So much is spent on just talking about what's
Yeah.
happening,
If
and
that
very
there's the
little.
pause. There's the
Mhm.
pause that many of us don't do.
Yes. Is
It's
just
you and
going
I'm
and
thinking as you're saying it, most people skip from vent to now I'm gonna do this.
yes, to take action to change my circumstance
Right.
or something like, as if you can, sometimes you can't. Some circumstances are human beings that are just who they are, and we can't
Mhm.
change them.
Yeah.
So, we have to process through the emotion we have and reframe possibly our circumstance. Or before we even reframe, you have to feel the feeling all the way through, which means unnaming it, and then now what do you do with it? So the tool that I developed is called the connection tool, and it's these three parts: narrating, naming, and now what? And going through the now what as well. I'm angry. What am I going to do with that now? Not how am I going to fix the problem, but how am I going to process this emotion?
Mhm.
What am I going to do to express this anger, to move it through my body? And how am I going to take really good care of myself? How am I going to soothe? How am I gonna support? Mhm.
Yeah, and that is so important, especially for this community because we always say, and this is a title of a book, like the body keeps a score. And
Mhm.
so a lot of those emotions get held in, and a lot of our people end up getting really ill
Yep.
physically because
Yep.
they're not processing those emotions. They're holding them
Mhm.
in and they're doing other things, and then it catches up later.
Yeah, and even when we're sick, we need to be curious, "What's this teaching me? What is this what is my body trying to tell me?
Mhm.
Is this some unexpressed sadness? Is this some unexpressed disappointment or hurt or legitimate rage?" I mean, anger is oftentimes really a secondary emotion to something that's deeper,
Mhm.
this feelings of abandonment or rejection or, deeper disappointment. This isn't how I thought it was going to be. This isn't what I wanted it to be. And so we're grieving,
Mhm.
right? We're really sad. There's righteous indignation, like when we're like really raging against the system, right? Um, and that can be very motivating. But when we're really in pain about somebody's actions towards us, that's needs soothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how there's that pause built in of like, how do I feel? How am I gonna process it?
Hmm.
Before deciding what to do because it's like moving too fast. You don't We always say that when you are in with court stuff or in general co-parenting, when you're in an emotional state, you can't make good decisions because you
No,
can't think
and you
straight.
literally can't because of your brain.
Right.
The brain has these different functions, and when we are in stress, we're in the reptilian part of our brain. We're in reactivity on purpose because if I'm about to be chased by a bear, I can't be thinking, "I wonder what's the best strategy
Right.
here. Should I?" Yeah. If you were able to think about it, you probably would come up with a good strategy to get away from a bear.
Right.
But if you're like about to be hit by a car, you're not like, "Should I go right or left? Which way should
Right.
I move?" You
Right.
just move, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And it's a good, like, a fear response is good, it protects us. But a lot of times we get stuck in that. We get stuck in a pattern of dipping down into allowing our nervous system to take over. And what we want to be doing is soothing our nervous system so that we can access that prefrontal cortex, that executive function, that
Yeah.
real deep logical thinking brain that you can't access when you're stressed. It just the brain doesn't work like that.
Yep. So now another thing that is really common in our world, our community, is that kids in these situations are often in the middle of a conflict between the two parents, and one parent is trying to turn a child against the other parent. So the child will come and say things to that parent, after coming home from a visit that really upset the parent.
Yeah.
And I think you had some insight on how to handle it, because obviously there's some big feelings involved when that happens, and people's brains are not functioning logically because it's so upsetting. It's like we're already dealing with betrayal and trauma from our exes, and now it feels like it's continuing through our children.
Yeah, right. You know, I wonder if you want me to speak to how to help the child with that or to
Yeah,
the parent
both.
because
Child first. Kids are
yeah,
always
because
first.
really if we can get into I think sometimes understanding what's happening with our kid can dip us out of what's happening to us.
Right,
Like can pull us out because I know everyone is a really attentive, lovely parent, right? You want to be make sure your kids are okay, as we
right.
said. And so how do you do that? And really looking at what happened, narrating what happened. Oh, you're saying this about what mom or dad said, and you're telling me this story. I wonder if you're feeling a little confused.
Mm.
I wonder if that's confusing. You go to mom's and she says this, and you go to dad's and he says this, and I wonder if that's just hard for you.
I noticed you're saying statements that start with "I wonder," and I remember
Yeah.
using that as a technique when I was teaching a webinar on how to deal effectively with it, but approaching with curiosity.
And I use the phrase I wonder really, really important because most of us will either say, "What are you feeling?" which is open ended and confusing.
Mm,
For a person who doesn't have literacy or is not in their prefrontal cortex, they're not able to come up with the name of what it's called.
wow, that is so significant, because that is,
Mhm.
I think when people feel like they're saying that to their child, they feel like that's the best thing they can do.
Yeah, what are you feeling?
Yeah. What's
Tell
the
me,
matter?
tell me what's the matter? And we're actually saying in the connection tool, you're saying here's what's happening for you. Like just narrating a circumstance is really powerful. Like even I don't know if clients will come to me and I'm like, well, look what's been going on. You're one kid just went to kindergarten, the other one is doing potty training, and you have this ex, right? Like just kind of talking about all these circumstances that are
Right.
happening that are true,
Yeah, like
and then and saying
summarizing it and reminding them, "Look at what you're dealing with. This is really
yeah,
hard. That's why you
yes,
feel this way."
yes, putting it in a narrative.
Mhm.
Right, building a narrative, building language, because a lot of times, especially for a kid, it's like they just experience their life without ever reflecting because they're not supposed to. That's metacognition, and they can't do that till they're like 9 or 10.
Yeah,
But we can help them. They still need the process of like, well, even little things like, oh, you were on the swing and you were swinging and then you fell and now you have a big boo-boo on your leg and it's bleeding. Yes.
right.
That's what happened to me. Right?
Yeah, it's
It
like, you
feels
get it. You get it.
yes, you get it. It feels so good when someone does that. And then you say, "I wonder if you're feeling sad."
Yeah.
And we ask we name it, and then we allow not only are we doing it because they don't have language, or we say, "I wonder if you're feeling sad," because then they could disagree. It's
So it
yes
leaves
or
it
no.
open. Yeah.
Yeah. No is fun. No. Great. Tell me more. If it's not sadness, let's go deeper and figure out what is this called.
Uh-huh. Love it.
I do too.
What about, like, with a teenager? Can
Mhm.
you flip it to a good example with a teenager? Because it is so different to talk with a little kid versus, we know, teenagers.
Yeah. So I think it like with I have teenagers
Mhm.
and it's very stealth. Connection is super stealth. So it's what's interesting about the connection tool is that we can do it aloud. You can narrate a name by saying it out loud. And then other times we just do the work inside. So we're
How? I'm like, what does that mean? Do the work
yeah,
inside.
you are looking at your human And you're putting them in a narrative. Huh, okay, so they just got home from dad's.
Mhm.
It that went like this. They had a test last week. Their shirt ripped, their favorite pants, like my son's favorite zipper got broken, whatever.
Oh, no.
And yeah, I don't know, right? These things are huge for them. So we're
Yeah.
kind of looking at it, we're thinking about their life, and we're then looking at their affect, their behavior, looking at it as a clue and just being like, they must be feeling really overwhelmed.
Mm.
And then when we come into their presence, we've already kind of settled in to maybe they need to talk about something or not or whatever. And we're a compassionate witness of their life and of their emotions. And we don't have to say anything. The language, the way that we are in their presence communicates that.
Wow, I love that term, compassionate witness.
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes parents feel like, "Oh, my kid came back and they just went in their room and shut the door and they're not talking to me." And I feel like if they're not talking to me, they're rejecting me and there's probably something wrong and should I go in there and find out what's going on, or I'm so worried. But again, that's your own stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you can process that then, right? Like, here I am, I'm in my head, I'm worried, I'm anxious, I'm feeling rejected by my teen or my little kid, or they came and they said, I hate you, or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that.
and we need to grieve that a little bit, narrate a name for ourselves and offer us ourselves some compassion. So self-compassion is the tool that we are using here, right? It's like, okay, I don't love this. This feels yucky. I'm
Mhm.
feeling a little concerned. What can I do to soothe? And the idea is to move those emotions through your body in order to connect.
As someone who's journaled for like 40 years since I was a
Mhm.
child, is this something that you use writing techniques with, or is it more of like teaching parents how to talk it through?
Yeah, I am also a big journaler. I've like written Calm Mama journal. Like I have so many prompts all the time.
Mhm,
And in my program, I teach like really specific strategies. But I have found that it can feel clunky and hard to get to a quick journal and to process it and
mhm.
everything. And that's so valuable. I mean, I journal every day as well, and like I'm always digging deeper and deeper and deeper. Um, and it's always what's happening, why does that bother you, what do you need, like just kind of really doing the work. But when I teach this tool, I call this the pause break. It's funny you said pause because that's
Mhm.
really what we're doing when we're in our head, when we're in our feelings. We need to stop and calm ourselves and take that beat and really being able to access that quickly and using that compassion tool with yourself. Like, okay, what's happening? Why am I so upset? What is this feeling? What should I do? And allowing it to move through our body. And then reframing in some ways with our
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Like,
Uh,
mhm.
One comment that you had said when we talked first was you can't really outsource parenting. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, that's what we're talking about with a therapist, right? It's like you can offer your child to go and process their negative emotion with someone else, but ultimately they want it to be with you. They want to process it with you and they feel safest, hopefully safest with you, especially if you're working on compassion, non-judgment, right? Being open. And so outsourcing that to somebody else is going to be really challenging because your kid is how do they build rapport? How do they feel safe? Some kids do, they just process and you have maybe hopefully you have a great therapist who does this work and is just talking about helping them name their feelings. But ultimately we want to be the person who is that for them
Yeah,
to
I know
emotionally coach
before I
them.
had children, that was like my dream. I wanted to have kids that I felt like I could be really close to, that would
Mhm.
trust me and we could talk openly. Of course, not when they were little, but as they got older because they're adults much longer than they are children.
Yes. Yeah, and how do you cultivate that relationship? And I think in your community, worrying that like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, da 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 da, there's all this kind of conversations around it or like I do all this and then it gets unraveled immediately once they're with their other parent or something
Right.
like that. And it it's like I have a relationship with my kid, and that's a very unique bond. And no one else has that relationship with them. Only me. Like they have a parent, that's their relationship with their other parent. And so no one can two steps forward, one step back, my relationship with my kid except for me.
Yeah.
So I'm always moving forward, and if I mess up, I'm backing off and I'm repairing. If I'm in my own narrative or if I'm over the top on behavior, like I'm lecturing or whatever, or I'm shaming, whatever I'm doing, I'm then the one who's creating the problem in my relationship. And then I'm going to go back and repair and work forward. But no one else can undo it. If you think that you're outsourcing your agency, then.
Yeah. As you said, I just wrote the word agency down because I thought about how in these situations, there's so many things that we can't control, but you've just affirmed how important it is, the relationship, and that we are the ones who can control that relationship completely. We cannot control what goes on at that other parent's house, even though a lot of our people spend a lot of time trying to figure out how they can do that. But to just sort of accept there's nothing I can do about that, but
No.
I can control my relationship with my child, and if I mess up, I can figure out ways to fix it and just keep trying again and again and again, and it's not like all is lost.
Yeah. And if our goal is emotional health, then we're going to kind of go back into that resetting back to that goal as often as we can. I'm just doubling down on connection. I'm going to figure out how to help my child with their big feelings. I'm going to help them process this negative emotion.
Mhm.
And, you know, okay, you're confused. That makes perfect sense. Right? We want to really validate the emotion. Like that's one of the phrases that I love the most is of course that makes sense. Even behavior. You're saying I hate you. That makes so much sense because you're so mad or you're so confused.
I think so
Wait,
many kids would be shocked to hear a parent say that because
yeah.
the instinct is to suppress, I think,
Yes.
to
Yes.
suppress those negative things. You shouldn't say that. You shouldn't
Mhm.
feel that. But kids in these situations, especially where they're being forced to be in survival mode at one parent's house, need to be able to feel those feelings and to express them and to get them out, just like we do.
Yeah. Yes. And when one person in a relationship uses loyalty as a barometer for connection,
Hmm.
right? Like, and weaponizes loyalty in a way that it's like you have to be loyal to me over your other parent. Otherwise, your attachment is at risk
Hmm.
or your safety is at risk. Then that's very painful because then that's where alienation comes from, right? And we're worried that our kid is going to pull away from us because the other parent is using loyalty to them as the thing that they need in order to feel safe with that relationship. If we understand that that's what's happening and we continue to say to our child, I don't need your loyalty. I don't. You can't do anything to put this relationship at risk at all. You can hate me, you can love your dad more, you can push me away, but I know that we love each other. I know that we're going to be just fine, that you're going to be in this relationship and forever. And how much safer that is. Mhm.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank you so much, Darlyn. Can you
I
tell
know we
people
could
I
talk.
know, I'm like, "End right there." Perfect. Can
Mhm.
you tell people again how to find you and a little bit about why you're so good at your job?
That's awesome. Well, you can find me at calmmamacoaching.com, and
And you
I
work
spell
with men too, right? Even though it's common.
yes, I do, but they all call themselves calm mamas. Um, in my experience, I haven't very few men reach out for parenting support. So, um, that's why I kind of focus on women and moms. Plus, I am a mom, So Calm Mama, I spell it MAMA because people
Mhm,
spell it different ways. So calmmamacoaching.com. I have a group program. So one is for parents with kids and one's with parents of teens.
mhm.
And so I kind of have these revolving groups and I teach a 6-week class online and there's lots of support built in so that you can learn these foundations. We didn't get into how to set limits, how to follow through with consequences without using shame. So I kind of teach this complete parenting model about ourselves, our own emotional regulation, which I call calm, and then this emotional coaching that we're talking about here, which I call connect, and then limit setting and correct. So I teach this full parenting process in the class. And I have a podcast called Become a Calm Mama. And so there's lots of great resources there. I always encourage people, if you're curious about the work, to go to those podcasts and just scroll through all the episodes. So those are the best ways to find me. And I have a bunch of free resources on the website, like the Stop Yelling cheat sheet, all about how to pause, different strategies for resetting your stress response, managing meltdowns and misbehavior, just so much good stuff on there.
Oh my gosh, this is gonna be so useful to our community. I can't
Good.
wait for them
Yeah.
to hear this and to head over your way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. What
All
a
right,
delight.
thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. You too.